What if I told you that hundreds of millions of dollars meant to help families rebuild their lives after hurricanes, wildfires, and floods were quietly funneled into luxury weekends at private resorts? Money meant for disaster relief gone. Homes destroyed, families desperate for help, and somewhere a golf course bill being paid with your tax dollars. Sounds unbelievable, right? But this isn't a rumor. It's a documented decision, one that a furious member of Congress just called out in one of the most blistering speeches Washington has seen all year. And the deeper you dig into what happened, the clearer it becomes this wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. A deliberate trade, comfort for the powerful over survival for the vulnerable.
Bill that intentionally and very clearly bypasses any cooperation with Democrats. I want to talk for a minute about what is actually in this bill, which is pretty remarkable. First of all, 2/3 of the funding in this bill goes to the border wall. Now, you can make arguments about the border wall all you want. Obviously, we know it's a pet project of the president. Would it be better if we had a border wall to keep the border safe? Probably. But is it really the most effective use of $46 billion? Of course not. Because not included in here is any funding for the actual effective methods of keeping the border secure. We live in a technological world right now where building a wall, where we've seen people scale it very easily, where we've seen it fall down because of the wind, is a relic from the 1950s that should not be what our government is spending $46 billion on. But worse, let's talk about what is not in this bill. There is no money for emergency management for FEMA. Now, this is not a partisan issue. Red districts suffer from natural disasters certainly as much or more as blue districts. And I can assure you, to my Republican colleagues, that when your district gets a flood or a tornado or a hurricane, you are going to be coming to FEMA begging for money. And I don't want to hear a single word from any of my Republican colleagues about where is FEMA when they need emergency management support. Because you are voting for a bill that includes nothing for money that you will need, and you will need it. You are being short-sighted. But do not worry, there is money for FEMA. There is money for FEMA, $300 billion. You know what that's for? For Donald Trump to play golf. $300 million to reimburse local law enforcement for presidential protection related to activities by the president. $300 million. Donald Trump has played golf 24 out of his first 99 days. That is a quarter of the days. So you are funding a bill that does not give any money for natural disasters, that does not repay towns, cities, states for the tremendous amount of money that they have paid out for our immigration system to operate. Nope. And that's red districts too. But we are going to make sure Donald Trump can play golf, because that's where our $300 million of FEMA money should go to. It's a disgrace. And it's a disgrace that none of my Republican colleagues will speak up against this money for golf, against the obvious and egregious due process violations. I know you. I know you are good people. I know you care about due process. You care about the rule of law. And I know in your private moments, when you think about Kilmar Abregu Garcia, and you see that the administration admitted that he was wrongly deported and sent to a prison in El Salvador, that you know that the president should simply correct the mistake, bring him back home so he can go through the proper court system. When are you going to speak publicly? When are you going to speak out for simple due process, which is the bedrock of our country? Because now it's going from Kilmar Abregu to American citizens, and who knows when it will be next. Donald Trump's not listening to me, but he will listen to you all. And I urge you to speak up for the good of our Constitution and our country.
The story begins with a budget proposal that was supposed to protect the nation, funding border security, emergency response, and federal operations. On paper, it sounded routine. But hidden inside the fine print was something no one expected: a quiet transfer of $300 million that once belonged to FEMA, the agency Americans rely on when disaster strikes. That money didn't vanish, it was reassigned. Redirected away from emergency shelters, flood relief, and hurricane recovery, and into something entirely different. And when Congressman Dan Goldman uncovered the details, his outrage filled the chamber like a thunderclap. Goldman didn't speak like a politician reading from a script, he spoke like someone who'd just discovered a betrayal. He said it plainly: while towns across the country struggle to rebuild after fires and storms, while families wait for FEMA checks that never come, that same money was quietly allocated for something no one expected: presidential protection costs tied to private leisure trips. In other words, taxpayers footing the bill for indulgence while disaster victims waited for hope that never came. Goldman's voice trembled with disbelief as he laid it out. There's no money for emergency management. None, but there's money for this. And that's when he dropped the number that left everyone stunned: $300 million. To grasp how much that is, picture it this way: it could rebuild hundreds of homes, fund years of disaster recovery, or provide emergency response training in every major state. Instead, that same money was repurposed to cover travel security, local enforcement costs, and logistics tied to private recreation. Goldman's message cut deep. It wasn't just about money, it was about morality. Because every dollar that disappears from FEMA isn't just a number on a spreadsheet, it's a promise broken to someone who's already lost everything. He reminded Congress that disasters don't care about politics. Hurricanes don't skip states based on party lines, and wildfires don't check voter registration before burning homes to the ground. When tragedy hits, everyone turns to FEMA. Red states, blue states, rich and poor. The moment disaster strikes, that agency becomes the lifeline. But when Goldman looked at this bill, that lifeline was gone. He turned to his colleagues and warned them: one day, you'll come begging for help, and there won't be any left. And he wasn't exaggerating. Across the country, FEMA's been stretched thin for years, funding cut, resources overextended. Local governments rely on federal reimbursement to recover after floods, tornadoes, and earthquakes. Without that money, towns collapse under debt. So when Goldman saw $300 million diverted, he understood exactly what that meant. The next disaster could hit, and FEMA might not have the funds to respond in time. That's not just mismanagement, it's a ticking time bomb. But this wasn't only about budgets, it was about something darker: the way power reshapes priorities. Because the bill Goldman was dissecting wasn't an accident, it was engineered. 2/3 of it, nearly $46 billion, was reserved for an outdated border wall project that experts have repeatedly said doesn't work. Walls crumble, people climb over them. Technology exists that can secure borders more effectively for a fraction of the cost. Yet that's where billions are being poured, while critical services like emergency relief are stripped bare. Goldman called it what it was: a relic from the 1950s sold as modern security, and the symbolism of it all couldn't be clearer. On one hand, concrete walls being built for political theater. On the other, real people waiting months for help after losing their homes to floods. It's not just hypocrisy, it's inversion. The government claiming to protect its citizens while abandoning them when they need protection most. Goldman's outrage was more than justified. It was the sound of someone realizing that the system isn't broken by accident, it's broken by design. He looked across the aisle and pleaded for reason, not insults, not slogans, just basic decency. You're good people, he said. You care about law and due process, and that line struck a nerve, because behind his frustration was disappointment, not in the opposition but in their silence. He wasn't shouting across a divide, he was asking them to remember their oath, to stand for fairness, for justice, for the Constitution itself, but silence filled the room. The heart of his warning came next. Goldman told the story of a man deported in error, a case the government itself admitted was mishandled. Wrongly detained, wrongly exiled, his life upended by bureaucratic indifference. Goldman said, if this can happen once, it can happen again, and if leaders don't correct it now, it won't stop with immigrants, it will spread to citizens, to anyone who challenges power. That's how it starts. One rule bent for convenience becomes a precedent. And before long, law becomes optional for those at the top. That's the chilling part of this entire moment. It's not just about money being misused, it's about a deeper erosion of accountability. A slow drift toward a government where loyalty replaces law, where conscience is a liability, and where silence becomes the safest choice. Goldman's fury wasn't about one budget, it was about watching the foundation of democracy crack in real time. Because think about what this $300 million really represents. It's not just taxpayer money, it's the country's moral compass. FEMA exists for one purpose: to respond when tragedy strikes, when Americans are at their lowest. Every flood victim, every wildfire survivor, every displaced family looks to that agency as their last hope. When those funds are siphoned off to cover luxury, it's more than corruption, it's cruelty disguised as governance. It's a message that says, your suffering can wait, our comfort cannot. And maybe that's what makes Goldman's speech resonate so deeply. He wasn't talking to cameras, he was talking to conscience, to every person who's ever watched leaders make excuses for misusing power, to every citizen who's seen politicians twist empathy into optics. His anger was the echo of millions who feel unheard, unseen, and betrayed. What's haunting about this story is how familiar it feels: misplaced priorities, political self-preservation, money rerouted in the shadows. It's a pattern. And every time it happens, trust erodes just a little more. You start to wonder how many disasters went underfunded while officials smiled for cameras. How many recovery efforts stalled while someone approved another special expenditure for private comfort. And that's where this story stops being about one man's speech and becomes about all of us. Because public money is public morality, where it goes tells us who we are. If a nation spends billions on spectacle while cutting funds for suffering, it's revealing its values in the harshest possible light. Goldman didn't just expose financial mismanagement, he forced America to look in the mirror. He warned that the refusal to speak up, the normalization of injustice, and the prioritization of image over impact will destroy democracy from within. It doesn't collapse overnight, it corrodes slowly, through quiet votes and silent compromises. Until one day, there's nothing left to protect the people who trusted their leaders to act in their best interest. Goldman's closing words weren't theatrical, they were desperate. He reminded his peers that leadership isn't about comfort, it's about courage. The courage to stand up even when it's unpopular, the courage to say no when the easy answer is silence, because history doesn't remember those who stayed quiet, it remembers those who chose to speak. So what happens now? That depends on the public. On whether people keep scrolling or start asking questions, on whether they demand transparency or let outrage fade into another headline. Because the truth is, corruption doesn't survive in sunlight, it survives in apathy. Every viewer who ignores it becomes another brick in the wall protecting it. But the opposite is also true. Every voice that speaks up chips away at it. Every person who shares the truth forces accountability closer to the surface. That's what this moment demands, not passivity, but participation. Because the real story here isn't just that money was misused, it's that we noticed, and the question now is what we do with that awareness. The world doesn't change because politicians have a conscience, it changes because ordinary people refuse to be fooled. The same way Goldman refused to stay silent, his words weren't just a critique, they were a challenge. To anyone watching, he was saying, this is your money, your government, your future. If you don't protect it, no one else will. And that's what we should take from this. It's not about sides, it's about standards, about demanding that leadership means service, not self-interest. That taxpayer dollars should rebuild homes, not fund vacations. That government should answer to the people, not hide behind them. So before the next disaster hits, before another bill slips through unnoticed, remember this story. Remember that $300 million meant for relief never reached the people who needed it. Remember that someone in power thought no one would notice, and then remember that someone did. Because awareness is the first step toward accountability, and accountability starts with you. If you believe public money should serve public good, if you think leaders should answer to the people who pay their salaries, then don't let this story fade. Share it, talk about it, ask questions, hold power to account. And if you want to keep uncovering the truth behind what really happens in Washington, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and like this video, because the more eyes on stories like this, the harder it becomes for anyone to hide the truth again.